What is the difference between Kalashnikov and Sveshnikov variation in Sicilian defense? What makes these two openings very special? We're going to break down in this video, and I'll show you a couple of variations that you can use in your opening repertoire. So first thing, we should understand the difference in the early stage of these two openings. So after d4, which is the standard position in Sicilian defense, if you want to start with Kalashnikov variation, you should go for the move e5. If you want to play the Sveshnikov, you start firstly with the move knight f6, and then when they usually develop the knight to defend the pawn, then you go e5, and in that case, this marks Sveshnikov variation. So now what is the difference? The difference is because you commit the knight f6 move at the early stage of the game. And that's why in the Sveshnikov variation, we are, like in the Kalashnikov, getting this hole on d5, having this backward pawn, which is not really a weakness, it's actually a really strong pawn that controls the center together with the pawn on e5. But later, after bishop g5 move, this immediately pins our knight. In the Kalashnikov variation, this is not the case. Why? Because when you play immediately the move e5, when they go knight b5, and when you play d6, now bishop g5 is not the case, and you are not going to develop this knight on f6 at all. So what is now the difference? What this tells you? In the Sveshnikov, you're relying more on the central control, positional understanding, and, fixed pawn structure with a strong center. In the Kalashnikov variation, since you didn't play the move knight f6, you keep a lot of cards open and some options for white and a lot of fight on the board. So, for example, also in the Kalashnikov variation, it's possible to play the move c4 as one of the main lines. In Sveshnikov variation, after the move d6, there is no option to push this pawn to c4, unfortunately. Okay, later this pawn comes here, after we go something like bishop g5, a6, knight a3, then we go b5, trying to make the fork, and now, oops, not that move, knight e5, and this pins the knight, and later on they can also count to push c4. But usually in the Sveshnikov variation, pretty much the most famous line that we are seeing all the time is when white is vacating the square for the knight to come to c2, then to e3, and then to control together the middle. Of course, black is going with bishop g5, and black is intending with this strong dark square center, together with his bishop pair, somehow to achieve bishop g5, castles, and later f5, with some ideas also like rook b8 and b4 is a classical Sveshnikov ideas. There is no so many tactical ideas here because we got very thematic structure in the Sveshnikov variation. In the Kalashnikov, this usually will never happen. Why? Because when you play the move e5 and when they go knight to b5 here, you play d6, all this bishop takes on f6 and giving up the bishop pair for structural advantage and controlling better the d5 square is not the case. So I will more focus on Kalashnikov since that's my main repertoire and I like to play more Kalashnikov than Sveshnikov. Also, I'm gonna put the course in my description on my website. Currently now it's on sale, so you can take a look. I'm gonna show you some variations that are included in the course of Kalashnikov variation. In the main line, c4, one of the main lines, I put in my course bishop e6, which is also the most flexible move. Later on, you can decide to go even with g6, bishop g7, knight f6, one of the most popular setups. But also depends how white plays, and usually like they're playing knight on c3 here, developing the knight. And every time you see the knight comes to c3, you should always kick this other knight with the move a6, and then when he comes to a3, then this knight becomes weird knight. Later on, this knight reroutes to the move to the square e3. But that's important to remember, to not play a6 before this knight is played on c3, just to not sort of waste time. Like for example, bishop d3 is one option because they don't want to commit still with a knight 1 c3, like they want to provoke you to push the move a6. In that case, you can play the move g6, but I recommend the move bishop e7. So the point of this is later to go bishop g5. But there was some novelty that I included in this course, which is really nice. For example, if white now goes knight 1 c3, which is very normal move, a6, now we want to restrict this knight in the corner. And now bishop g5. So we are immediately offering the exchange of this bishop. They can take, and they can avoid taking, of course. Taking usually is not the best option for them, just because it develops immediately your queen, and suddenly white is experiencing some pressure, especially if they go castle here. We have this very unpleasant move h5 for our opponent. Later on, we can also include our knight by going knight f6, knight h5, and then knight f4, stabilizing the pressure on the king side. One way of attacking, of course. If they don't capture, if they, like, let's say, commit knight c2, trying to regroup this knight here, anyway, it's good because we know we're gonna trade our dark square bishop. That's a bad piece on e7. It's like kind of restricted. But at some point, this bishop can be really, really nice if we manage to regroup this bishop along this diagonal a7, g1. And now, for example, after knight c2, the very unpleasant move is h5. This is novelty, never been played before. I discovered when I analyzed this. The whole point is actually to start immediately attacking the king side. We know that white will most probably castle, like he doesn't have so much options. He needs to provide a counterplay on the queen side. So for example, after castles and h4, we're about to make this move h3, which will completely makes the trouble in the long term on g2 square and generally the back rank issue. If they play h3, which is thematic move every time they're about to face h3 ourselves, they need to play this move. And now after trading this bishop, if the rook takes, this allows our queen to come in, which is amazing. So maybe a little better move is to take back with queen, but let's say many players would take back with rook just because they want to put a rook into the game. And now queen g5. So now we are very close to make the decent setup and start attacking the king side. So with this maneuver, we are making sure that our opponent will see the pressure, and also it's not really easy to handle this pressure on the king side. For example, what can happen? Let's say if they want to put a queen here trying to defend something. Also, threat of bishop takes h3 was real, so knight f6 is now into the game with knight h5, knight f4. If knight e5, you can just ignore this threat by doing the move rook to c8, stopping any sort of knight jump on c7. And by the way, if they take the knight on f6, you can just simply take back with your pawn, and then later you're gonna open up also your g line for your rook, king e7, and the other rook to g8 will happen, and you're gonna have amazing attack. If knight b6 or something, then rook will come to d8. If they come back with a knight, which is, I think, waste of time, now you are simply improving your position, just to show you that all these checks, even king in the center, is nothing bad for us. And even this check back, we just put a king on f8 and we stick with our plan. Knight h5, knight f4, rook h6, rook g6, and we keep this center closed so we can create the kingside attack. So that's only one line that I included in my course, which is, I think, really amazing. In the past, people intend to capture on c1 here, and after, let's say, rook captures, to develop the knight, go castle, and then just simply focus in the middle, in the center, trying to use these dark squares. I put this line because I like it. I think it's really dynamic and asking the questions how white should handle this pressure with early h5 and so on. So that's only one line, and the line that we cannot see in the Sveshnikov variation, because white is deciding, will he play c4 or will he more likely intend with a move knight 1 c3. So when they play this move, of course we are kicking this knight out of the way, knight goes on a3, and now we have options, of course. In my course, I put a b5, as I think this is one of the most aggressive approaches. Bishop e7 is a very standard way that's recommended by Grandmaster Daniel King. Bishop e6 is something I also play myself. It's also more like strategical. It's not completely aggressive, and you don't have so many tactical opportunities. But when you go b5, you're telling your opponent, I want to fork you, so you need to move your knight standardly on d5. And now the thing is, in the Sveshnikov variation, you remember that you already had your knight on f6 being pinned by their bishop. In this scenario, we don't have this. And now we play the move knight g7, which is recommended in my course. I think this move is something that can pull out white out of comfort zone completely. The reason why, variations such as bishop g5 exist, but are not as same good as if this knight was on f6 here. Why is that the case? Because now after h6, if they decide to take our knight, they're going to simply develop our bishop, or even we can take back with our knight. So standardly, this position is very, very easy to play for black. Also, we got useful move h6, and there is the way also retaking with a knight here, and then going later with a move bishop e6 or bishop e7 and trying to exchange this knight on d5. In one of the very famous games where Susan Ponger played with black pieces, queen h5 looks like, oh, this is disaster now for black, but there is no threats. The only threat they have is just please don't play the move g6, you're going to receive checkmate on f6. So you're actually trying to get out of this spin and also provoke them again to start trading and helping you develop. For example, bishop e6 is the move here, and then going later with rook b8 and queen d7. Rook b8 is always useful move, not just because supporting b4, it's also avoiding any sort of forks, and queen d7 is priority just to avoid any pins. Pretty much, I can just quickly show you how the game went after this. So bishop d3 played in that game, rook b8, c4, already going in the wrong direction because there is a d4 weakness. Knight e4, exactly, c takes b5, h takes g5, and this is also the motive. At some point you can even sacrifice the exchange because queen will be completely out of the game, and now after knight takes d5 and simply entering with your own pieces, sacrifices, and here like king is completely out of the game. With a takes b5, white can resign. In the game was, I think, bishop takes h1, and Ponger, Zhuzha, Susan Ponger, in the past her name was Zhuzha, now Susan, she played bishop takes h1. A little bit complications after this, but after a takes b5 here the game is over. You see how the queen is completely out of the game. So even in this variation, in the bishop g5 and h6 queen h5, which is inside my course, even in this variation that looks scary for black, you just need to make a few moves like a bishop e6, rook b8, queen d7, and then you have very easy game and no pressure around your king. And one of the main lines are c4. At this point, you can take the knight on d5, but knight e4 is one of the moves. And now there is very interesting thing in case of something like knight c2, and when you capture this knight, c takes d5. In this variation, there is one very beautiful move here, bishop g4. I won many games, blitz games like this, because people intend to quickly, very quickly play the move f3. And f3 allows the move queen h4. And now the problem is if g3, white is completely losing because we have this knight takes f3. And queen sacrifice, because they're going to retake our queen later, doesn't work here, just because after bishop takes, queen takes, by the end of the day, the rook in the corner hangs. And that's why black is still winning here. So that's the main problem. Of course, white can barely survive, but in practice, I think that this is very hard. Like now, queen f2 entering, then later rook c8 and obtaining the c line is very, very pleasant game for black. Everything is inside my course. So the option of, for example, here people intend to play bishop d3, then when you take to retake with the other pawn because they want to open up this diagonal for the bishop and generally to create more dynamics and imbalances in the opening. Here I recommend the move g6, which I think is definitely one of the best options. The reason why is because now you're going to play bishop g7, castles, and later on you're trying to expand your pawn structure and create a lot of trouble on the king side. The main problem for white is people are thinking that taking on b5 is very solid, and it can be, but firstly they need to provide king safety. Like you're going to ignore this in all this variation, pretty much you're ignoring this takes, and after castles now you're threatening the move e4 and then rook e8, so that's why they need to castle. But guess what, anyway we play the move e4, which is powerful move. The reason why they can't take this is because now queen h4 and suddenly we start tremendous attack on the king side, where they're gonna face a lot of difficulties in stopping the checkmate. Firstly, many players will just bring the bishop back. That invite us to play the move bishop g4. And after playing the move bishop g4, queen is under the attack. If they go f3, which looks very normal, right? Then now we have this beautiful move bishop e5, threatening checkmate, and they cannot play the move f4 because pawn is pinned. So now if something like g3, then we just go for the sacrifice, and after takes, we just take back with queen, king h1, and okay, checkmate is somewhere there, like bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, knight takes f3, and there is two checkmates that they cannot really stop. So that's it. I showed you what is the difference between Kalashnikov and Sveshnikov. I hope you like it, and you can check it out, the link in the description, to see how this PGN Kalashnikov file looks like, so you can start playing this opening already from today. I wish you good luck with these openings. Both of them are very good, and I'll see you in the next video.